So we've talked about why I am calling this the Water Lily Project. Since a lot of this journey for me is not only dealing with some things, but mostly trying to deal with my health and get to a better place to get as healthy as I can and have a better quality of life. I thought that I would just take a second and, well, not a second, and address my medical history. I've been listening to a documentary series called The Thyroid Secret and reading a book called The Root Cause, both by Dr. Isabella Wentz. And one of the things that really sparked my ear was the idea of writing down your medical history and kind of seeing how you got here. For an autoimmune disease, you need a combination of three components, if I remember correctly. So you've got genetics combined with some toxicity and an autoimmune trigger. And so different triggers for different people, but certainly when you lay down your medical history, you can see when you started to be ill in some way, and then repeated trauma to the body, accidents, surgeries, illnesses, reoccurring illnesses, and infections. Of course, birth control for women plays a big part in that, which is one reason why they think women have more autoimmune issues than men do, or more autoimmune diseases than men do, if I got that correctly. And antibiotics. So, a couple of different components there that really are traumatizing to the body. They are an assault to the body's natural healing system, and your body doesn't have time to recover. And of course, you can imagine if you add to that recipe stress, type A personality, holding in your true thoughts, feelings, self, it's just really making a bad combination. So, actually, last night I remembered that I had been in the hospital when I think I was about 5 or 6 years old, and I think it was for a stomach illness. Like maybe I had the stomach flu and just was really dehydrated, and my mom had to take me in, and they kept me overnight at least for dehydration is usually what I see happen. But I'm not technically sure about that because it's only a memory I have. My mom couldn't really remember that. But just thinking like there's a little thing there in your childhood. Does it affect where I'm at today? Don't know. But let's jump ahead to my next big medical event. And that was when I was about 14 years old. In fact, I wasn't really even in this country yet. I was on a mission trip to Egypt, and I had not drank water for the 2 weeks of boot camp because I really didn't like the taste of water and was ignorant. And so by the time we landed in Egypt, day one, I passed out. Right before I did, I complained about some stomach pain, passed out, and woke up 2 weeks later. So I was unconscious for 2 weeks, on IVs, getting injections of some kind, don't know, third world country. And that summer I also injured both of my knees on two separate occasions. And then 2 years later, when I came back from China, I was sick with stomach issues. And by the time I was diagnosed, the doctor said I was probably on the tail end of hepatitis A. Or possibly immune hepatitis. So that was where I was entering into my senior year of high school. By my senior year, I had noticeable allergies, runny nose constantly. And as we know, allergies are an autoimmune response from the body. So I can even see way back then, things were in motion. So that was when I was about 17 years old. By 20, I was hospitalized and diagnosed with fibromyalgia, had my first colonoscopy, and had the diagnosis of irritable bowel. That progressed through my 20s into ulcerative colitis and Crohn's. By the time I got to Crohn's, I was starting to try and make changes to my life. As I was going on the 8th colonoscopy and had cancerous polyps removed, and my cancer, I was becoming aware of my cancer risk being increased as I am approaching 30. That's not good. I start making some life changes to get that under control, if you will. So all during my 20s, on top of that, got hit by a car and fell out of a house, and a couple of trips to the ER, a couple of surgeries, constant allergies. It was in my early 20s I was diagnosed with food allergies, though I have kept those a part of my diet. If the thought there was you certainly could eliminate it, but if you don't really find that you have a reduction in your allergy response, for me, I was just concentrating on the runny nose and the eyes and, that chronic type of inflammation. Well, then you probably could eat it. And I have all the way up into present day, this week, in fact. Now I know that was just further perpetuating the problem, constantly feeding my body something that it was fighting against. And so here I am at 45, and I've been doing that for 25 years. So as I enter my 30s, I'm trying to turn back the Crohn's, got it down to manageable levels all the way up until 42, 43. So it took me 13 years to get a clean colonoscopy, actively working on it, right? So I think I would say that I started working on it about 30 to 43, getting that down to a clean colonoscopy. And I've been, I've got the 5-year clear where I don't have to have one for 5 years because it was clean. Though I will tell you that during that colonoscopy at 42, H. pylori stomach infection shows up. Not surprising now as I'm beginning to educate myself. Apparently very common. Let's see what else. Also in my 30s, I had a breast that was bleeding for no reason, spontaneously with no pain. They wanted to, of course, take it off, look around, see what was happening. This was after multiple mammograms, radiologist there with me having it, looking at the films for a couple of hours because he was certain he would find something, never did. I elected to just let it go and see how it was. It didn't cause me pain, and I wasn't a big fan of the removal of my nipple or breast, just to, excuse me, got a little choked up at the thought of that happening. Just kidding. Anyway, I wasn't a big fan of them just removing it to take a look around. This was after I had grown this, if you can see that scar here, I had grown this tumor out of my chest. It actually kind of stuck out like a kind of like a golf ball, if you will. It wasn't until they went to remove it that we found out had been growing into my chest, which is why it hurt. No explanation, just a weird thing. And seeing how that scarred, I was not about to let them cut into my breast, of course. And let's see, the fibromyalgia diagnosis, I will just go back to that. Even though I was in my early 20s when I had that diagnosis, I went into remission after a couple of years. And that has just recently come back. About 2.5 years ago, I got that diagnosis back along with chronic anemia. It was when I was about 35. Yeah, 30. Nope, that's wrong. It was before that. It was before my daughter was born. So I was about 33 when I got my first hypothyroid diagnosis. So I've been dealing with that for almost 12 years. At some point that developed into Hashimoto's. I think it's been actually that way for a really long time, but nobody ran the proper test to give me that official diagnosis until I asked for it here recently. No one ever did an ultrasound of my thyroid, which I just asked for recently. And just as a side note, the technician couldn't find it, so we'll have to see what becomes of that. So these are all of the things. I'm just trying to think of what else I wanted to highlight. Of course, since the first initial hypothyroid diagnosis, my medication has just been ever increasing to that level of a person who wouldn't have a thyroid might take, like with my weight and height. If I didn't have a thyroid, I'm about at that level. I would say the only positive thing about that is I was able to get a medication decrease in November, and I've been able to stay at that so far, that slight decrease. My hope, of course, was to continue to decrease and get off of it, but with the recent ultrasound, I'm not sure how that's going to play out. So another positive thing is I've been able to manage my anemia with lifestyle diet changes, and was able to get off the prescription supplement, prescription level supplement, and I've also been able to raise up my B12 naturally and get off of those injections and medication that I was having to be on. I'm currently on no medication for the Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. I've been able to work on managing that through life change and stress and food. And, now I'm continuing to make even more changes in learning that every little bit does count, and how important it is to continue to make those changes as you regain your health, especially when you've been dealing with it as long as I have. The longer you have chronic illness, the longer it takes to heal it. So I was just listening to a podcast today, and they mentioned a month for every year that you've been dealing with chronic illness. So I certainly didn't like that calculation too much. I had this grand plan that I was going to get well in 2 years. So I'm trying to face a new reality for that. So I'll do a separate video in regards to that. So I'm thinking that is a good overview of my medical history. And then just to review things that I'm cognizant of and dealing with now. And let me just say this. I never looked at allergies as an autoimmune issue, even though they've plagued me since my, since high school, and certainly since I was tested twice very thoroughly, just always didn't want the runny nose and never really saw that as an autoimmune thing, to really look at the root cause of what was causing those allergies and to take care of it. So I know that's just kind of been an underlining plague for me. Never knew that ulcerative colitis was autoimmune. Never looked at fibromyalgia as autoimmune. Now here we are with Hashimoto's, yet another autoimmune disease. And of course, if you're aware of Hashimoto's and fibromyalgia, then you know how those two things can complicate your life. And I will speak to how it complicates my life separately. And I will just say that one thing that I looked up as a result of this new education that I'm doing is all of the other autoimmune diseases that are out there, because one opens the door for another, right? And I think I've proven that. I have several that are on my radar. And I've realized that I'm developing another one that deals, it's called scleroderma, something like that, SCER something derma. Anyway, it's a collection of collagen. You'll most often see it on people's knuckles, their hands and feet. And I had just noticed this odd thing growing on my finger, and I had wondered what it was, saw the list, looked at the picture, and knew right away. So that's on my radar as well, because that can go internal, and the collagen can collect and scar on your internal organs. And then the last thing that I'll mention is I forgot about the ever-returning fungus that I was blessed with last year. And skin, because I have these little skin irritations and developments. So I've got like 3 different types of dermatitis. Plus I had the fungus for several months. It just came back on my toe, which apparently I hurt and didn't feel. I know that because I was scraping the blood out. Don't know how that happened. And the skin cancer that I've had twice. Once here on my face. And if you're interested in seeing a picture of that hole, I'm happy to share it with you. My husband said it looked like I was shot in the face. So that's awesome. And I had one here, which actually healed pretty nicely. And I took care of it in a different way than having it literally cut out. So now, of course, I'm on the radar for dermatological checks every few months because I have a couple of other spots that are just waiting to turn. So anyway, that's kind of a brief overview, although 15 minutes may not be so brief. If you're curious as to how I got here, probably a lot of my closest friends and family aren't aware of all of what I've been dealing with over the years, and certainly did not get into all of the different surgeries I have had from my 20s and 30s. So I think I've had 5 different surgeries. Those were pretty rough. I might share some funny stories of those and other accidents, like falling out of the house with the water hose. That's a funny story. Gotta laugh so that you don't get depressed, right? So stay tuned for more episodes. I have more to share, and I hope that y'all have a great night. Thanks. Oh, by the way, Doctor Who. And if I was to ever meet the doctor, he showed up in my yard and said, "Come travel with me," I'd be gone. Later.